Hello, my name is John Oudyk. I'm an occupational hygienist with the Occupational Health Clinics for Ontario Workers, and I'd like to talk about how to calculate time-weighted averages as they're applied to heat stress measurements. First of all, before we get to that, we need to remember that all workers who are exposed to heat stress need to be trained. They need to be trained to recognize the signs and symptoms of heat stress. On the right-hand side here is a checklist of things that people need to know when they're exposed to heat stress. They also need to know how to respond to them. So when it gets too hot and they feel the symptoms, they need to know to take breaks, to drink more water, to seek shade, etc. Next, we need to measure the temperature and humidity, and there's a lot of gadgets available for a relatively inexpensive cost that can measure temperature and relative humidity, and some of them even have apps associated with them so you can follow it along. Some of these measure the temperature and humidity every minute or every few minutes, and they store them and you can download them to analyze them later. Once you've got the temperature and humidity, you need to convert it to Humidex. And this table allows you to do that. Let's say the temperature outside is 37, as it was recently in the heat dome that we experienced. And the relative humidity is 45%. What would the Humidex be? Well, first we find 37 on the left-hand side, where the temperature is listed, and you go across until you find the relative humidity 45%, and then you go down, and at the intersection you see that the Humidex is 47. Next, we can't just take the Humidex number by itself. We have to adjust it in case people are wearing extra clothing, then there's a penalty applied. But there's also a bonus. If you have short sleeves and pants, you actually subtract 2 Humidex units from the measurement because the exposure limits assume that you're wearing long sleeves shirt and long pants. So if you're wearing less than that, you can take 2 units off the Humidex. If you're working in the sun, in direct sun, you need to add 4 units to the Humidex value. So then you find your adjusted Humidex on this chart, and then you read out the response on the right-hand side. So let's use a scenario that we just described where the Humidex is 47, it's sunny, and the wind speed is 20 kilometers an hour, temperature is 37 degrees, and the relative humidity is 45%. Suppose you're a lifeguard sitting outside in a chair guarding swimmers for 15 minutes every hour. There's no shade, you're wearing t-shirt, bathing suit, and water shoes. You have a half an hour heat stress break because it's really hot, but the break is taken in a non-air conditioned inside lunchroom where the temperature is 32 degrees, relative humidity 60%, resulting in a Humidex of 42. In addition, the rest of the hour you're working inside, cleaning up and sweeping, things like that, for 15 minutes in the same conditions as the lunchroom. So if we just measured the outside temperature and we found that the Humidex was 47 and we assume that it applies to the whole hour, we end up with a problem. And this is why we have the problem. Well, first of all, the Humidex under 37 does not require extra breaks. However, when you get to 38 to 39 Humidex, there's 15 minutes relief per hour. Between 40 and 41, there's 30 minutes relief per hour. And when the Humidex gets between 42 and 44, there's only 15 minutes work and 45-minute breaks. And if you give it above 45 Humidex for the whole hour, only people who are medically supervised by watching their either heart rate or their core temperature can continue to work. And that's what we mean by medically supervised. So if there is no medical supervision, do we have to shut down? And what does only medically supervised work can continue really mean anyway? Well, first we need to remember that the advice in the Humidex plan is based on the American Conference for Governmental Industrial Hygienists, or ACGIH, heat stress, heat strain TLV, or threshold limit value. And it assumes a moderate rate of metabolic activity and no acclimatization. Second, the advice is based on the ACGIH TLV documentation, which requires any worker who is exposed to above the upper limit to have heart rate measurements and or body core temperature measurements taken regularly to ensure they don't exceed these medical guidelines. So taking an individual's heart rate or core temperature is collecting medical information about an individual. Observing another person and yourself for signs and symptoms of heat stress is not medical monitoring per se. It obviously would be included in medical monitoring, but by itself it is not medical monitoring. It is just recommended practice under heat stress conditions. The ACGIH have a body core temperature limit. The TLV is designed to try to keep the body's temperature below 80 or 38.5 degrees Celsius. Physiological monitoring is applied when you can't control the exposure to a Humidex below 45, which is equivalent to the ACGIH TLV for moderate unacclimatized workers. And once you get above that, the ACGIH recommends these following heat strain monitoring criteria. First is having a heart rate in excess of 180 beats per minute, subtracting the individual's age in years. So 180 minus your age for healthy individuals with normal cardiac response. The recovery heart rate at 1 minute after peak work should be less than 120 beats per minute. And if you're measuring the core temperature inside the body, it should not be more than 1 degree from the pre-job temperature if the pre-job temperature is less than 37.5, which essentially means it should be less than 38.5 degrees Celsius. Now at the bottom there you see another criteria, and that's probably the most important one to realize, that anyone who shows signs or symptoms of heat exhaustion or heat stroke, or even requests to stop work, should be accommodated regardless of what the physiological monitoring measurements indicate. So we don't trump symptoms by measurements, it's the other way around. Symptoms always trump measurements. Okay, the medical monitoring is essentially the collection of data which is considered medical information, and therefore we can be concerned about whether that's kept confidential or not. Persons measuring the body temperature or heart rate need to be trained to do it properly and have appropriate instruments to do it with. Measurements need to be recorded, and this information should be maintained in confidence. It's as medical information should. The results also need to be interpreted properly with appropriate responses. Most workplaces don't have the resources to do this properly. Okay, let's look at our example again of 47 Humidex. But let's take another look because, first of all, they're not spending the whole hour at the Humidex of 47. They're only spending 15 minutes of it there. The other time they're spend is their heat stress break, where they're at a Humidex of 42 inside the building, and that's the same conditions under which they're doing indoor cleaning. So only 15 minutes of the hour they're at 47, the rest they're at 42. Now we also have to take into account the effect of being in direct sun when you're outside guarding swimmers. So we need to add 4, which gives you a new measurement of Humidex adjusted for the sun of 51. Now, because they're wearing shorts and t-shirts, we can take off 2 Humidex units, and so we end up with 49 for the outdoor and 40 for the indoor. So this is our situation, 49 outdoors and 40 indoors. And now we're going to calculate a time-weighted average. So what that is, we multiply the time, the proportion of the hour, 15 minutes over 60 minutes, times the exposure for that 15 minutes. So for guarding swimmers, we have 15 minutes times 49. For the heat stress break inside, we have 30 minutes divided by 60 minutes times 40. And for cleaning up, it's 15 minutes divided by 60 times the Humidex of 40. And then we add those 3 numbers up, and we get an equivalent time-weighted average of 42 for the Humidex. So if we look up 42 on the chart, we see that it requires a 45-minute break, whereas we're only allowing 30-minute breaks. So we have a bit of a problem here, so let's take another look at it. So here we have scenario 2, which is the same as scenario 1, except half of the heat stress break is taken by jumping into the pool to cool down for 15 minutes. The water cools the body faster than air, up to 25 times faster. So we'll ignore the radiant heat from the sun when they're outside in the pool and assume equivalent value of Humidex of somewhere between 25 and 30. Now this is a guess, and if you want to know exactly what it should be, I would suggest asking Dr. Glenn Kenny at the University of Ottawa if you want to be more precise about the number. This is from one of his papers, and it explains how we estimated what 15 minutes of submersion in 23.5 degrees pool water would do for heat stress. And you'll see here the green boxes are for 2 different scenarios. One is being overexposed to heat and cooling off in water that's between 14 and 20 degrees Celsius. And the other scenario is overheating and then being cooled down in water that's 26 degrees Celsius. And you'll see it's equivalent for these scenarios of somewhere between 16 and 18 minutes in the water in order to get your body temperature from above 39 to below 38.6. So we'll do the calculation over again, however this time having 15 minutes in the pool. So here we go, calculating the time-weighted average, the same as before, the 15 minutes indoors and the 15 minutes working indoors. And the 15 minutes in the pool, and we'll assume the top end of our range here of a Humidex of 30, but I think it's probably lower than that. And when we do the calculation, we get an equivalent Humidex, a time-weighted average of 40. So if we look on 40 on our charts, we see that that's equivalent to a 30-minute break. And so now we're consistent with taking 30-minute breaks. So if you're interested in some more resources on this topic, you can look at the Humidex-based response plan, the chart that I showed you, and it's available online in English and French. And there's a calculator online that can also help you calculate different scenarios. And there's a practical guide, which has some workplace examples worked out on how to manage heat stress under different types of conditions. So thank you very much for listening, and if you have any questions, please email me at this email address. Thank you.